We're back mocking the first round of the NFL draft. Let's see what these teams are going to do. Let's get to it. Now the divisional rounds in the books, we have the next 4 picks set. Houston, LA Rams, Baltimore Ravens, and sadly, my Detroit Lions are picking at 28. We've got 2 rounds of mock draft goodness with the majority of the picks set. We're starting to see a bit of a picture of what teams may or may not be doing. We're seeing head coaches getting hired. We're seeing teams getting pieces in place. There's a lot that's going to happen between now and the draft, but let's do some speculation. Now, we know that the top 3 teams in the draft need quarterback help. Probably not going to see 3 quarterbacks go back to back to back. There's too much talent with the edge rusher position. There's too much talent with DBs. I mean, there's a lot of reasons to look elsewhere, and especially because this quarterback class just isn't as strong as it has been recently. But I do think at pick 1, we see Tennessee look towards the quarterback position. They could look towards Abdul Carter, Travis Hunter. I mean, they could use any of these players, but I think they really do need to get their quarterback set. They have some skill position pieces. Their offensive line is beginning to take shape. So I do think they look at Cam Ward because I think he does have first-round pedigree in his profile. I think he's worth a first-round pick, and I think one of these top 3 teams is going to take him, but I think it's going to be Tennessee. At pick number 2, though, this is where I think things get a little different. So Cleveland, if you watched our mock draft video, Cleveland fans believe that Stefanski can just plug a quarterback in and they'll be successful. I don't necessarily agree because that hasn't really worked yet. We know that Deshaun Watson got re-injured. We know that they're trying to figure out what that looks like, but they need help in the skill positions. Obviously, they traded Amari Cooper. They have some weapons for a quarterback, but I think they need more than that. I think their defense needs another edge rusher. I think their offensive line is going to start needing some help. I don't see an offensive lineman go in the top 5 this year, but there is an edge rusher that will. Abdul Carter is very talented. He's probably easily a top 3 pick and really could be in conversation for the number 1 overall pick in this draft just because of how this quarterback class is. So I expect Cleveland to be the one that could potentially take a look at him. I think he makes sense for the way that their defense runs. I think Stefanski is going to need to continue to get after the quarterback and give his offense some time because they're going to have to figure out what they're doing with the quarterback. Do they look at free agency? Do they wait and draft a later round guy? I mean, you could look obviously towards national champion Will Howard if you want to look later. He's like a day 3 pick in my mind still. Do you look at a Jackson Dart? Do you look at a Curtis Rourke? Do you look at one of these guys that's got a lot of reps in college that might be able to step in and learn your offense quicker? May not have the athletic profile or may not be as talented as some of the higher end quarterbacks, the Cam Wards and Shedeur Sanders of the world, or even Jalen Milroe. There's a lot of pieces to that puzzle that you have to figure out as a Cleveland fan, but I think you just take the best player and you figure the rest out after that. Next up is the New York Giants, and they're in a similar situation. They need quarterback help. They need quite a few things. In my mind, I'm not looking at Shedeur here just because I don't think he's a top 5 pick player. I think he's probably a late first, early second round type guy in my mind if I'm drafting. So Giants fans, let me know in the comments. What are you doing? I'm looking at Travis Hunter here just because of who he is as a player. I think he can do a lot of things for you. I think that if they really did want to try to use him both ways, he would be successful. Obviously, they don't have to because they got Malik Neighbors. They have some weapons on that offense that they could just use him in the secondary as a defensive player. But no matter what position you put him in, I think he steps in and makes an impact from day one. Got to go get the best players at this point. Pick number 4, we know that Mike Vrabel's going to have his work cut out for him figuring out and rebuilding this defense in his image, but we know he has his quarterback. We know Drake May is the guy. I mean, he looked good with his opportunities last year. So I think they're going to look elsewhere. I think with what New England's going to have to work with, I think they're going to have to look at skill position for Drake May. Do they look at some of this talented wide receiver crop if all these guys actually make it to free agency? Do they look at Ted McMillan here at pick 4? Mike Vrabel's draft history is kind of all over the place. We've seen him take DBs early. We've seen him take defensive players. We've seen him take offensive linemen. We haven't necessarily seen him take a wide receiver early, but I think you're going to see it here. If I'm picking here for them, I'm going Ted McMillan. I don't necessarily think that they get one of those free agent wide receivers, one of the elite. So you need to get Drake May his number 1 receiver, and that is Ted McMillan. Guy can step in from day one and immediately be the best wide receiver on this team. They could add some players in free agency, and they could look elsewhere. They could look at, Mason Graham, Will Johnson. I think those are both guys that are very worthy of a top 5 pick. But the DBs in New England, I think they have a solid one in Gonzalez. I think there are some pieces there to work with. So I think they will look at their offense to start just to help their quarterback out, because they're going to need to put up some points. They're going to have to stay in games by chucking the ball while they rebuild this defense. Now up at pick 5, all bets are off with this front office that you've got here. I'm really surprised that things stayed the way they did. We know they've got their quarterback. We know they've got some young talent on the roster in some areas, but there's a lot of needs. I'm going to go Mason Graham here just because he's the best player in my mind that's sitting there on the board. I think he gives you just an absolute monster in the middle of that defensive line, and I think that's the best way to go for them. Way that they pick, anything's possible though. Next up, Vegas. This is still a team in flux, right? They're still trying to figure out some things in the coaching side. There's a lot of room for growth here. This is a team that wouldn't surprise me if they jumped on Shedeur or waited for Jalen Milroe type. I'm going to give them Shedeur here. I don't know that I love it one way or the other. I'm not a huge Shedeur fan early in the first round, but I think if you're Vegas, I think you start getting concerned as, do the Jets, do New Orleans, do some of these teams that are coming up just after me, maybe look at one of these quarterbacks, and then I think they get a little nervous and pull the trigger. You could easily see Will Johnson go here. It wouldn't surprise me if you see Calvin Banks. Connerly from Oregon, I think, would be another really good piece to go here. There's a lot of players that I could see the Vegas Raiders go after. Now, some of this will get set once they really start to dial in this coaching staff and what's happening here. But for now, we're going quarterback just because that is a really big need for them. We're going Shedeur Sanders. Next up on the clock, we got the New York Jets. There's another team. Needs quarterback help, needs plenty of things. They need to figure out the direction they're going. Again, another team that's still trying to fill vacancies. So we're just going to look at what does this team need and what can we do to help them fill that need. And this is one of those teams that this pick could really be a variety of different ways. You could look at offensive line. You could look at defensive line. I know they drafted Shanu last year in the first round. They have Will McDonald, who was an early round pick on the defensive side, but the interior of that defensive line next to Williams, they could use another piece. I mean, Kenneth Grant would be a really fun one to put here. You could look at Will Johnson if you want to put him on the opposite side of Sauce Gardner. You could look at Williams if you need edge rush. I mean, there's just so many different directions they could look. The only thing I feel super confident about is that Ashton Genty's not going to be the pick, just because they have a stable of running backs that I think they like. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to go with my best available player, which would be Will Johnson here. You're building on a strength, right? You obviously have Sauce Gardner, but you could use a piece next to him, and having two shutdown corners is not a bad thing. Will Johnson is a beast. He's a very good ball hawk. He's very good in coverage. I mean, he can play press man. He can do really anything that you need him to do. I think there's been a little bit of a lull here just because he has dealt with injuries recently, but he's still arguably the top corner in this class, depending on how you view Travis Hunter. Next up, Carolina Panthers. I am not looking at quarterback for them because I believe in Bryce Young. I think that you saw progress being made, and I think Dave Canales saw that as well. I'll be interested to see what the Carolina fans say in the comments. This is one of those where I'm going to look to try to protect him, though. He needs weapons. He needs playmakers on the outside. He needs He needs to continue to see offensive line help because Calvin Banks and Will Campbell are still available. I think you have to consider those two as options. I know they took Ike Mekwonu recently, but the offensive line still could use some pieces. They could still use some interior defensive line help. This is one of those where I'm going to jump around a little bit, and I'm going to go with Kenneth Grant here, a guy from Michigan that I love, that would love to see him in the middle of this defensive line. I think he really could step up and be a force in the middle there. Him and Mason Graham made a really great team in Michigan, and I think he could be the same in this defense with Brown. I think what you're looking here is I always tend to look at the trenches, especially for teams that have quarterback figured out, that have some of the other pieces but need help in the trenches. I think they could look at wide receiver in round 2, round 3. I think they could look for tight end, but I think in the top 10, you really want to nail your trenches. You really want to nail edge rushers. You really want to nail some of those premier picks. Next up, New Orleans Saints. They're a team that's in flux, right? They're trying to rebuild. They're trying to get a lot of things figured out. They have two quarterbacks on the roster, and Derek Carr and Spencer Rattler. New Orleans doesn't necessarily seem to be in love with either. I know that Carr is a solid veteran that can be a game manager, ball distributor, point guard for your offense if need be. You got to keep them protected. You got to give them weapons to work with, though. This is a point in the draft where you start considering some different things. Alvin Kamara's not getting any younger. Do you see running back be an option here. Everyone loves Ashton Genty, and somewhere in the next 4 or 5 picks, probably next 4 picks, one of these teams is probably going to look at him. Chicago, obviously, I don't necessarily feel as strongly about just because they have Swift and Roschon Johnson, but Ashton Genty's better than any of the running backs that are on these next 4 teams. Christian McCaffrey is an elite player. I just don't know if he's going to stay healthy and be able to stick around. So San Francisco may even consider to move on and look in a different direction and have his heir apparent. But we know that San Francisco's offense can work with a variety of different running backs, so I don't necessarily prioritize it high. For me, it's either New Orleans or Dallas. I've been mocking Dallas to Genty this whole time, but New Orleans would be one of those teams that it wouldn't surprise me. They have looked at offensive line as of late. I think with a new head coach, things will look a little different. I think they need to get some edge rusher help, so I'm giving them Michael Williams, or Michael Williams. I apologize if I messed up your name. I think he is arguably the best defensive player that's still available on the board at this point. I think you can look at a couple different ways. I like James Pierce Jr. I like Nick Scarton. I like a lot of edge rushers that are here, but I think New Orleans needs to add one of those premier pass rushers in this draft. They can look at some of those other positions a little bit later. Chicago Bears are on the clock. We know they just landed their new head coach in Ben Johnson. Ooh, pains me to say it. I do love me some Ben Johnson, and I think he'll be really great for that offense. That being said, the defense is in a good spot too, right? They have a lot of pieces there that have kept them in games in 2024. So I think they could look in a few different directions, but this offensive line needs to get set. The interesting thing will be is what do they value here? Because you have, when you look at the offensive tackles, Connerly, really any of these top 5, I could see as potential options here at 10, because you have the best available players, the best available offensive linemen are all still available for you. So if I'm Chicago, I'm going Kelvin Banks. I like Will Campbell a lot, but I think Kelvin Banks is the top tackle in this class. I think it's Connerly, Banks, and Campbell are kind of going to be the 3 that people really say, this is the tier of top offensive tackles. And we're on to San Francisco. So San Francisco is another team that you could see go a variety of different directions. San Francisco dealt with a ton of injuries at wide receiver, at running back, and in a variety of different roles. But we have to get their offensive line figured out. Trent Williams ain't getting any younger. Pooney did a great job on the interior, so they need a tackle as well. And this really does come down to which tackle do you value more? Campbell, Connerly. I'm going to flip the script and go with Connerly here. I know that I've started seeing more mock drafts kind of move him into the first round, into the high first round. I think really Campbell and Connerly are kind of similar but different types of players. And for me, I think the biggest difference between Campbell and Connerly is I think Connerly, albeit maybe a little lighter in terms of weight, but I think he's faster. I think he's more agile. I think he is going to help with the way that San Francisco's offense runs. They need to move guys around a lot and have some athletic offensive linemen. So I think that's what gives Connerly the edge for me if I was looking at the tackles for San Francisco. But let me know in the comments below, San Francisco fans, what would you do? Are you looking offensive line? You looking at a different position? Up next is Dallas. I mean, it's a no-brainer for me. You've got everything in place. I think they could use some help on the defensive side, continue to use some help on the defensive side. But Ashton Genty is going to be the pick. I mean, that offense does not run without a running back to help set up that whole thing. They are very much a run to set up the pass type team. Now, I know that could look a little different with a new staff coming in, but I'm still leaning towards Ashton Genty just because he's elite and he helps Dak with what Dak needs, which he gives him a viable running back that can not only catch out of the backfield, but can be an elite runner between the tackles, can really help open up things so that he can then distribute the ball to his playmakers. Up on the clock, Miami. This is a roster that I could see them go a couple different directions. You could see them look to continue to bolster that offensive line because that is an area that does need some love. I think you've spent quite a bit on some young defensive players over the last few years, and I think they're talented. I think Chop Robinson is going to continue to develop into a nice player for you. You have some secondary pieces. This is one of those teams where they could go a lot of different directions. If you look at the simulators and what a lot of them are saying, that a lot of them are looking at offensive line, and I think that's kind of where I would sit. If Tyreek Hill leaves, I think you could see them look towards, hey, do we grab, a Luther Burden? Do we look at one of these high-end receivers? Do we look at a tight end? Johnny Smith did a great job, but he's not extremely young. And Tyler Warren is a top 20 pick. Somebody around here is going to look at him and pull the trigger. Is it Miami? Certainly could be potentially there. They could even look at quarterback. I mean, Tua's situation is so terrifying, for lack of a better term. So they could look at quarterback. I think that they don't jump on one of these quarterbacks here just because you saw, Cam Ward go. And I really think he's only the only first round quarterback in my mind. I think everyone else starts looking from second round on. So here at 13, we're going to continue to build on the offensive side. I'm going to look at one of the weapons. So we're going to go with Tyler Warren just because I think he can do a lot of different things for your offense. And I think you can't have enough good playmakers in your offense, especially, not only with Jonnu Smith getting to 30 and on, but the fact that you could use him in a variety of positions. You could flex him in the slot as a big slot receiver. You could have him in line. You could have him do some different things. So give me Tyler Warren here. Just add another piece. Miami fans, let me know what you think. That could be crazy for you, but I like it for your team. I think if you want to look at a quarterback in the next couple rounds, I think that makes a lot more sense because I think you do need to have a solid backup because Tua's injury isn't an if, but a when. Next up, we got Indianapolis. This is a team that their quarterback is still going to be the conversation to be had. I still think you need to give Anthony Richardson time. I think he can develop, but you can't force him. He's got to have time. You've got to let him get those reps and get going. So let's see what we can do to help him out. And this would have been the spot where I would have thought Tyler Warren would have been a perfect fit. They have some good receivers. They've got good running backs. Their offensive line is starting to age, and I think we definitely want to consider them here. But a tight end is a young quarterback's best friend. So we're going to give him Colston Loveland, who's a guy I've mocked them a couple times. Now, it wouldn't be surprised for me. I wouldn't be surprised if they went with a different position and they waited till 45 and took a tight end because I really do like the next three tight ends, Taylor, Fannin, and Loveland are all very good. I think Loveland is the only first round tight end left. Atlanta at 15, this is a team where I think they're going to need offensive line help. I think they need to continue to build in that area. I think they could use some defensive help. You could look at defensive linemen, but they drafted some recently. So at this point, I think you're looking probably edge rusher, offensive lineman. You could look to a wide receiver. I don't think you necessarily have to. I think Jalen Walker could be a fun one. He's kind of an edge guy in my mind, linebacker that you could do a little bit more with. You've got Benjamin Morrison here, who's an elite corner. I think any team would be lucky to have him. Siobhan Revel Jr., if there wasn't an injury, he'd be a guy that I would consider. Walter Nolan. I mean, there's a ton of pieces here. I know Atlanta fans, let me know what you think, what players you're looking at. Because Will Campbell's still sitting on the board and he is arguably the best player available at this point, I think you take him because Atlanta's offensive tackles are not getting any younger. Jake Matthews continue to do a good job, but I think you're going to need to make sure you've got that heir apparent. You need to protect your quarterback. So we're going Will Campbell. Next up were the Arizona Cardinals, a team moving in the right direction. I think they've made some good decisions last year in bringing in guys like Marvin Harrison and Robinson. And I think you've got some pieces there, Max Melton. There's a lot of young players that you were starting to bring in that I think are going to help you move in the right direction as a team. But I think this defensive line is where we're going to look. We obviously could use edge rusher. We could use an interior. Really depends on how you feel about these next 3 to 4 players. I think Walter Nolan is going to be a guy that moves up draft boards throughout the process. I think he's going to solidify himself as a kind of somewhere in the teens type player, somewhere probably from here to Cincinnati, maybe even Seattle. One of these teams kind of in this range would definitely be a team that would not surprise me because I know Cincinnati, I'm going to look at interior defensive linemen. I think this is where you could start to see a couple go, and I think Arizona might think about that as well just because they could use some help on the interior of their defensive line. So here I'm going to go with Derek Harmon from Oregon. I think he is going to be one of those guys that you can move around a little bit there on the defensive line and brings a lot to the table that I think could help them. I think they've started to build something there, and I think they really could nail it with a nice first-round defensive lineman. Next up, Cincinnati. Their defensive line is desperate for help. I mean, that's really what stopped them from making the next level. I think that offense played great throughout the season. I think that defense is what needed some help. This would have been a spot where I really would have looked at a guy like Kenneth Grant. So here it's kind of which one do you like the most? Are you a Nolan, Williams, Walker? I've seen a lot of varying reports and different players that people have looked at. I've been a big Walter Nolan fan throughout his time in college. I was a big fan of him for the last few years. I think he is versatile. He's got some burst. He's got some bend. He's got some things that you really can get behind and get excited about. Next up, Seattle Seahawks. This is a team that was right there. I think they're making good decisions. I think that quarterback is a concern for some. I don't necessarily see it as much. I think Geno can get you that next level and hold you over so you can wait for a better quarterback class or look at one of these later round quarterbacks. I know a lot of folks keep dropping the Jackson Dart name. I think Will Howard will see some hype with how he performed. Obviously Riley Leonard performed pretty well throughout the college season. There's a lot of these guys that you could see later come in and be a guy, but I don't think that you're going to get a premier quarterback here. I think Jalen Milroe is definitely very talented. And like I did in my Seattle mock, I still think offensive line is the biggest need. And it just so happens that Cameron Williams is still available for you guys. I know that everybody absolutely loved that pick when I did it last time. I'm not going to do it this time, though. I'm going to look at a different offensive lineman just for you Seattle Seahawks fans. I know you didn't love that pick. I think you could see any one of these three offensive linemen as the pick, though. I know that a lot of folks don't love Cameron Williams. I think he will do just fine. I think he can be a solid starter for a team. I think you could put him inside, put him outside. I think you could do some different things with him. So in that vein, we'll look at one of the other ones. We'll go with Josh Simmons from Ohio State. I like the player. I think he could be a really nice tackle at the next level. Let's see if Seattle Seahawks fans feel the same way. Up to Tampa Bay at pick 19. This is another team. You made playoffs. I think you're moving in the right direction. I think you've got some aging veterans on the defensive side, so we're going to look at trying to bring you some help, some reinforcements there. I think you're set at safety. I think you're set in a variety of areas in the defensive side of the ball, but I think that you could use some help in that interior, in that linebacker room. I think this is a spot where you start seeing guys like Jihad Campbell and Jalen Walker be very much in consideration. You could see some offensive line also be potential depending on how the offensive line falls in the draft. But I'm going to go here with Jalen Walker. I think you could see either of these players be the pick here for them. But I think defense, I think that linebacker room, I think that's kind of where I'm starting to kind of zone into for the Tampa Bay team. Let me know what you guys think, though. Next up, Denver. Made the playoffs, moving in the right direction. I think you're a team on the rise. I think you could see them go in a multitude of directions. It would not surprise me if they targeted a wide receiver. It wouldn't surprise me if they targeted a tight end. Wouldn't surprise me if they targeted offensive line. It wouldn't surprise me if they targeted defensive secondary. I know Jones did well for you. I'm going Malachi Starks here, though, because he is an elite safety in the next level. I think he is going to step in from day one and really help set the tone. I know PJ Locke, and I know you got some other players there, but bringing in a guy like Starks just makes sense. Wouldn't surprise me if you see interior defensive line help. I mean, there's a lot of different ways they could go depending on what happens with free agency, but I'm just going to take the best player for them and move on. Next up, we have the Pittsburgh Steelers. This is where I think it can get dicey for some of those teams that are looking for a quarterback that may think early second round, may take him late first. Pittsburgh's one of those teams. Russell Wilson did not cook. He looked cook as the season went on. Are they bringing back Justin Fields? This seems to be one of those conversations that a lot of teams, I've heard a lot of people say that a lot of teams are going to target Justin Fields and he could move into a different role. I think Pittsburgh brings him back, so I'm not going to necessarily look at him, but Jalen Milroe is the other piece here. Do they really like what Milroe can do? I think him or Quinn Ewers would be two guys that they would consider here. I would love to hear from you Steelers fans. I know you guys have a ton of thoughts. I've been reading through a lot of comments, and Steelers Nation definitely feels passionate about what they do at quarterback. You could see them target a wide receiver as well. I know they traded for Mike Williams, and they've tried to do some things to help out that wide receiver room. But until you get your quarterback figured out, really nothing else matters. And now I've talked myself into doing it. We're just going to go into the quarterback situation. So now you get down to, do you take a quarterback like Ewers, who's played at a high level, dealt with some injuries, or do you take Milroe, who's got, I think we haven't seen his best yet. I think he could continue to develop. The question then comes down to, does Mike Tomlin and his staff, are they able to really develop a quarterback? That's going to be the question that we have to answer here. So we've got two here. I'm going to go Quinn Ewers just because I think he brings a lot more veteran leadership to the table. I think you could have him plug in from day one and really step up and take that offense and run with it. The question is, can you keep him healthy? Can you keep him upright? Can you give him enough weapons to make those right choices? I think it'll be interesting. Plus, I think it'll be a fun conversation in the comments because people are either going to love it or hate it. Next up, we got the Chargers. Harbaugh and company did a great job moving from worst to playoff team in their division, or not worst, but pretty close to worst. They had a rough season last year, and they came back strong and made a playoff push. What we do now is going to be interesting. I could see them going a variety of different directions. They could use, like most teams, they could use a lot of different help to help speed up this process and help speed up this draft. I'm going with wide receiver here. I think Luther Burden is one of those guys that you're going to see going in the late teens, early 20s, just because he's an elite wide receiver. He's a very talented player. And you've got bigger guys in your Quentin Johnstons, but you need a guy like this that can do a lot of different things, and you can move him around the formation and really use him as a chess piece. Next up, Green Bay. This is a team that I'm going corner. I've been going corner for them this whole draft process. Benjamin Morrison's sitting there. I think he makes a lot of sense. I don't know if he's there for them at that pick, just because of how talented he is. But, you've seen my rationale so far. Let me know what you think. Next up, Minnesota. Their quarterback situation is something they got to figure out. They have one pick in the first 2 rounds. So this is going to be one of those. Are we going with the premier edge rusher? Are we going to get another offensive weapon? Are we going to look defensive line? With Scouton still on the board, I think it makes a lot of sense that you bring in a premier edge rusher. It just doesn't seem right to let an edge rusher like that fall any further. Now we're on to Houston. So the Houston Texans, this is a team that really everybody's going to have feelings about how that Kansas City game went. But this is a team that's on the rise. They're continuing to make good decisions and move in the right direction. I think they need to continue to think about playmakers as well. This would be a spot where I would look at an Emeka Buka. I would look at, tight end potentially. I know that Schultz is very good, but they could look different direction moving forward. We're going to look at the receivers just because they're a team moving in the right direction. I think they could look at and grab the last kind of elite wide receiver in this class in Emeka Buka. I know they want to bring back Stephon Diggs. I know they've got Nico Collins. You can't have enough good playmakers on that offense. They've dealt with injuries. They've dealt with some times where they were trying to roll without some of those guys. So grab me a Emeka Buka. Get me another really good route running receiver that can help. Andy happens to know CJ Stroud very well from their time at Ohio State. It makes a lot of sense to me. And next up, we have the LA Rams, a team that is in a constant state of playoff contention. Their quarterback's getting a little older. I don't know that this is necessarily the time to go looking for a quarterback unless you believe in Jalen Milroe as the guy of the future for the Rams. I don't see it just yet. I think they could look in a few different directions. I think they could look at offensive line. We could still use some interior guys. We could use our depth quarterback. I think that's a later round pick, if not future pick. We could use some wide receiver help. What happens with Cooper Kupp? What happens, with some of that depth? And then corner. I wouldn't mind seeing them maybe target a couple guys in the secondary for some help. With what we've got here on the board, you could target, edge, you could target corner. Obviously, Jalen Milroe is sitting up there as one of the guys that mock draft database lists as one of their top guys. I want to look at the offensive line, see what we've got here. I think Booker is a really promising prospect. I think he's a guy that him or Sabanania is probably one of the two that I would look at. And I'm probably going to go Tyler Booker here. I'm going to go Tyler Booker here just because I like the prospect. I like the talent. I like what he can do. And I like that he could step in and be a prominent starter for them from day one and play a big role. Moving on to Baltimore, I think they could use a variety of pieces to help kind of backfill and help in some areas. They could use some wide receiver help, maybe look for some depth defensive linemen. Another safety next to Kyle Hamilton wouldn't be bad. Maybe some linebacker depth over time, some guys that could play on the outside, maybe be depth on the inside. There's a couple of ways you could look there. This would be the spot where I would start looking for, Jihad Campbell from Alabama. I think this would be a really good spot. I do like some of the guys that would be behind him, Stutzman, Carter. These are good players. I just don't think that end of first round is where you look at them. Looking at what's kind of available at this point, wide receiver, we have a couple of different options we could look at if we wanted to. I think second round is kind of the sweet spot for that with how the board has fallen. Let's see here. Let's see what we've got at safety. So, Evan Worry is a guy that I really like, and Xavier Watts. I think those are both really talented players. I think Evan Worry is pushing for early second, maybe even late first round consideration. I think this would be a fun defense to put a player like that in with his speed and his versatility. Him and Kyle Hamilton could really make some noise there. But let's just see what else we've got along the defensive line. Let's see what kind of defensive lineman we've got. Williams, Stewart, Deion Walker. Deion Walker would be a really fun prospect to put in this defense. And then you got some second round, third round guys there. I think I'm just going to do Evan Worry. I really like the player, and I think in that defense, he would be a really intriguing prospect. Now onto my Detroit Lions. It pains me that they're picking here at 28, not 32, but it's a team that's on the rise. I know a lot of folks were concerned with what happened at the end of the season, but they were playing on borrowed time. They had so many defensive players on IR. They were really scraping the barrel in a lot of ways on the defensive side, and they made it work. I mean, they won the division, got the first seed, got the first round bye. I mean, yes, it stunk, but Washington was a worthy team. I mean, Jaden Daniels, the more and more I see and read about him and how his preparation is and who he is as a quarterback, I mean, like, you're pulling for this guy. So not that I wanted Detroit to lose. I certainly did not want them to lose. I definitely saw where our struggles in defense were definitely going to be areas where they could pick us apart, and they did. So if I'm Detroit, I'm looking How do I backfill? How do I help fill in areas where guys can step in and play meaningful reps for us? We need some interior offensive line help. Graham Glasgow did not do great. Kevin Zeitler's getting up there in age. And even our tackles, Taylor Decker's getting older. Penei Sewell's young. Ragnow's kind of middle of the road. Mahogany looks like he should be able to step up as an interior guy. So I think we could use an interior offensive lineman. I don't know that I love, outside of Savania, I don't know that I love anybody as a late first round pick. And I don't even know that I think he's really first round pick. I think he's a solid second rounder. When you look at the edge rushers, I think we've got a couple here in Pierce and Sawyer and Princely that all could be in play here at 28. I think I'm going to lean into James Pierce Jr. I think the upside is there. And I think the versatility is there. I think you could play him in a variety of pass rushing roles. We don't know if Zadarius Smith's coming back. We know that Hutch will be back, but we need some edge rushing help. So I'm going to go there, and I'm feeling good about this. Moving on to Washington. Obviously, they made it to the Final Four for a reason. They've played very well. I think for needs, I wouldn't mind seeing them get an edge rusher. I wouldn't mind seeing them get a linebacker with tight end being, Zach Ertz getting older. I think they could use a tight end if there was one that was available. Wide receiver depth would be nice. Even running back depth. I think Eckler's done a good job. He's getting up there in age. Brian Robinson Jr. has done a great job, But outside of that, McNichols is fine, but he's a vet and getting older. So this is one of those teams that you could see him go in a variety of ways, and it would not surprise me. If they wanted to try to target some offensive linemen, maybe, but those are more probably depth guys at this point, because I don't think you're going to be able to get in the positions where they could use some help. I don't know that you're going to see any guys really jump in there, but because they could use some linebacker help, I think this is where I'm going to slot in Jihad Campbell. I think he makes sense for how Dan Quinn runs that defense, and I think he would be really fun piece kind of in that middle of that defense where you could use him in a variety of roles along the middle. As a pass rusher, as a guy dropping coverage, I just like the player a lot. And I think he makes it to the first round. If I wouldn't have put him here, I probably would have looked at him at one of the next two spots at Buffalo and Philly as well. I think they're both teams that it wouldn't surprise me if you saw them go after a linebacker. All right, next up at pick 30, we've got the Buffalo Bills. Offensive line, defensive line, cornerbacks, those are all kind of positions that I would not be surprised if we saw them go after. This is a spot where I would love to see them look at probably, I would think more Tyleik Williams, but maybe Stewart as well. I'm going Williams here in this situation. I would love to see him in the middle of that defense next to Ed Oliver. I think that could be a couple of really solid pieces to attack the offensive lines. If you saw corner there, I wouldn't be surprised. But Buffalo fans, let me know, who do you want Buffalo to take at the end of the first round? And next up, we're up to the Philadelphia Eagles, another team that, is in a good spot. They've got offensive linemen that are getting up there in age, so that's probably a spot that we want to look. We could look at corner, another team that we could look at linebacker. Tight ends are getting older. These are all different positions that I would not be surprised if they looked at. And corner, and the only reason I say corner is that they've got some guys that are getting older. I know that Quinyon Mitchell was a first-round pick last year, so it would not surprise me if they looked on the offensive side of the ball. This is one of those spots where do we see Ursary? Do we see Williams? I like Wyatt Millum a lot. It would not surprise me if they look closer to home and grab a guy like that. Marcus Embo is another guy that I really like quite a bit. I like these four players here are all offensive linemen I would love to see on Sundays. I think are going to do well at the next level. Because I am a big fan of Cameron Williams, I appear to be one of the few on here. I'm going to give them Cameron Williams. I think they need an offensive lineman who could help push for playing time early on the outside. Their guys are getting a little bit up there in age. All right, final pick of the first round, we got the Kansas City Chiefs. This is one of those teams that, the rich keep getting richer. They find ways to draft talented kids, throw them in, they get playing time. Kind of needs I would see here. It wouldn't surprise me if they looked at interior offensive linemen, really linemen in general, offensive linemen. I could see them maybe look at grabbing one that they could move around there. I wouldn't surprise me if we saw them take a defensive tackle. We've got some guys that are aging there. Weak side linebacker, safety. These are all positions that it wouldn't surprise me if they looked at them at this point. I would have loved to get them Emin Worry as well. I think he fits with a couple of different defensive schemes here at the end of the first where he could really surprise and slide in there. When you're looking at what's kind of best available, there's quite a few guys here that it wouldn't surprise me if we saw them go and look at because they have a type. They have a type of player that they go after. Here, I'm going to give them an offensive lineman just because I think those are going to be the most important pieces for them. Yeah, I think I'm going to give them Savania from Arizona. I think he could play at a variety of different roles on their offensive line on the interior side, and I think they could use that. They will need to look at considering an offensive tackle as well, right? Juwan Taylor loves to get penalized, and that certainly could be a position they look at. But I gave him Savania because I think he's kind of my favorite offensive lineman that's still on the board.